Well, I lived in Dahia. I actually lived in an apartment on Sayed Hadi, Nasrallah Street for a while, and then I moved to another apartment, still in the neighborhood. It's a very long, large area, and there are hundreds of thousands of people living there. Um, I don't know the numbers exactly, but it's a huge neighborhood, and it's a big part of the bigger Beirut. And to flatten it means to flatten a huge city in Europe, uh, let's say. So that was the objective. And of course, they have been flattening other cities in the south, and the West doesn't care because the West has exposed itself. They have no humanity. Their journalists are their corporate media journalists are tools. Their diplomats are morally bankrupt. They've exposed themselves. The West is at the collective West. The elites are at the bottom of humanity, the absolute bottom. I mean, North Korea shines as a bright star compared to these people. So whatever North Korea is, and I've never been, so I just based on their narratives on North Korea, they're the worst of the worst. So for the Iranians, this was inevitable. And something there are a couple of things I'd like to explain first, because over the past few months, I've tweeted a lot of things. And so I try not, even though I have a blue tick, which I don't know how I received. One morning I got up and I think they said anyone over 100,000 followers gets a blue tick. And so you're allowed to write longer tweets. But I don't. I try to keep my tweets short, unless I have to, or I feel I have to. There are a couple of things I want to explain. One is that sometimes um, the Iranian patience has to do with many different factors, and it's not, there are regional issues, there are international issues, and so when the Israelis were attacking Lebanon, I said that the Iranians are putting pressure on the United States by through the Strait of Hormuz, because the American siege has created a double siege, a siege on the world and a siege on the Iranian people. And the Iranians believe that the pressure is building on the United States. Some seem to interpret that as Iran wants the global economy to collapse, and that we're just waiting for the global economy to collapse. That's absolutely untrue. If that was the case, we wouldn't have controlled the escalation ladder in the war itself. Uh, Yemen never shut the Red Sea to shipping. Why? Because we didn't want the global economy to collapse. Yes, we could have done that, but that would have meant that everyone pays an enormous price. Right now, the Red Sea can be shut. And Ansarullah, the Yemeni armed forces, they've been preparing themselves for a long time for this day. But that is uh, a last resort measure. That's when, if the United States goes all out and the Israeli regime, there are different red lines. Each red line has its own response. As each escalation has its response. So the Red Sea is a, let's say, higher level response. The next war will probably lead to the shutting of the Red Sea, because it is expected here that the escalation will be very swift and very rapid. But that's not what Iran wants. So what Iran wants is to keep the pressure on the United States until the United States, it builds up to a degree that the United States realizes that they have to force the Israelis to stop. They could have stopped. They could have done this 3 weeks ago. They could have done this 4 weeks ago, because the economic catastrophe that is lying ahead of us, and which people do not appreciate, including myself. I mean, it's something that we don't comprehend. We hear about it. It sounds awful, but still, it's still something that we can't feel or touch or comprehend fully. But when it hits, it's going to be very bad. The hope in Iran was that the Trump regime would recognize that catastrophe is looming, and that they have to push they have to. And I said this a few times on your show. What the Iranians want is the pressure to build up in the United States to a point where the United States, where the regime, where the elites, including the Zionists in the United States, at least some of them, conclude that their interests are a priority over the Israeli interests. In other words, instead of being Israeli first, as they've always been and continue to be, they reach a point where they say, this is dangerous for the United States, and we have to do something to preserve the United States. Because there are different, I mean, some Zionists are maybe, you know, like like many of those in that we hear of, and these fanatics who are prepared to slaughter everyone. And there are other Zionists who are busy doing business, and they're pro-Zionist, but they prefer to have a happy and easy life in New York or in Manhattan or in the Bronx or wherever it is that they may be living in the United States. So this pressure is not intended to bring down the global economy. It's intended to put pressure on the United States to make the right choice. The United States did not do that. And so it reached a point where the Iranians said, enough is enough. And we're not going to allow them to wipe out the Lebanese people, especially since the United States and the Europeans, and their NGOs in Lebanon, and the Saudis, and the Qataris, and even others who I don't want to name, have been encouraging their people and the Emirates in Lebanon not to allow the refugees into their neighborhoods. The Europeans, these so-called supporters of human rights, have been pushing the Christians and other communities not to allow these families who've lost everything into their neighborhoods. And in some places that's worked. So what the Israelis and the Americans and the Qataris and the Emiratis and the Saudis are doing is they're trying to mobilize different communities against the resistance. And so people have been streaming from southern Lebanon, and some of them go to Dahia, and some go to other places, and some have nowhere to go. And so some of them had to go back to the south, and they were massacred. So these people, these Europeans and these Americans, have helped slaughter families and create desperation and immense poverty. So people who are living in their homes and in their villages, in their cities, and in the south, in not just the deep south, but also near Beirut or to the east of Beirut, they lose everything, and they're not allowed to go in parts of their own country because the Wahhabi and Salafi clerics have been warning their people not to let these people in. Qatari money, Emirati money, Saudi money, and elsewhere. Because the NGOs, the European NGOs, Western embassies have been telling the Christian community and elements in the Druze community not to allow these supporters of the resistance into their neighborhoods. So what they wanted to do is destroy the south and then go after Dahia. If they could destroy Dahia, then what happens? Then the whole resistance community is left in limbo. Half of Lebanon, let's say, has nowhere to go inside Lebanon. Now, a lot of people have opposed these Wahhabi Salafi Takfiris, who are basically agents of empire, all of them. I mean, it's so interesting. I went to one of their centers in Beirut once. I alluded to this on your show. And literally, it's like I don't want to go too, but it's not far from very expensive complex, huge complex, not far from Dahia. And I was there with another person, and we spoke to the head of that center, and he was so ignorant about the resistance. He's Lebanese. It's like he's never been 2 kilometers to the south of his place. I don't remember how far exactly, maybe 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers. His ignorance about I mean, he's a religious figure, but his ignorance about religion and about what other people think, his ignorance about politics, it was just stunning. But it was just, my understanding was that he was on the Qatari people and his center, but I'm not quite sure. But I don't remember because this was before Corona. But but that's how it is. So the Qataris, they pour in money, the Emiratis, the Saudis, others, and the Europeans, they have their own communities. The Americans, of course, they're the ones in charge. And so what they try to do is to corner the supporters of the resistance. And so Dahia, if it was destroyed, that would have meant that no one had anywhere to go. And that's what the West wants. That's what these Europeans want. That's what these embassies in Beirut, they love to see. That's the objective. That's what these Arab regime embassies in Beirut want. And that's what the Israelis were doing. So all of these people are in full coordination. It's a loose alliance, just like in Syria. Just like in Syria. Those people who spoke about the Blessed Revolution, they used sectarianism to push the American agenda. But it was never about sectarianism. It was a CIA project for the sake of Israel. And now we see that Jolani, he's busy communicating with Trump and seeing how he can help Trump shut down to corner the resistance and to help the Israelis. And you see that these so-called jihadis, these Wahhabi Salafi takfiris, who've been busy slaughtering people across Syria, they won't move towards those areas occupied by the Israelis in Syria. They won't touch those areas. Suddenly they're jihad, they're too busy for jihad, all of them. Some of them are from Iran, actually. These Wahhabi Salafis and from other countries. So till a while back, it was all about their bizarre, warped, and meaningless definition of, meaningless meaning morally meaningless definition of jihad. And now that they're neighbors with the Israeli regime, nothing. So this is all a loose coalition of regional and Western actors. So Iran saw that the incentive to stop the global crisis was not enough for Trump or the Trump regime. And so the only way left was to threaten war. And Iran was about to fire a huge volley of missiles at northern Palestine and to destroy targets across the board, both to put pressure on the Israeli regime, but also for a meaningful change on the battlefield in Lebanon. And by the way, the Lebanese Hezbollah and its allies, and they have allies who are helping them from different communities, religious and sect included, all included. They're doing fantastic on the battlefield. And that is what's creating the rage. That is why the Israelis constantly bomb cities and wipe out families and slaughter, because these pilots, the Israeli pilots, they have no, they're not human beings. They're just monsters. They've been doing it for, almost 3 years now. The drone pilots and the pilots, they just kill. They're killing machines. The Israeli military is just a killing machine. And so whenever they get angry, they go and kill a few families. And you've seen them. You've seen, entire families. You don't see it in the Western media. I don't know if you saw a couple of days ago a motorcycle of husband and wife and their child were on the cycle, and then the parents were killed and the child was wounded. You'd think that this would be like on CNN and a picture of it would be on the New York. No, nothing. Because they are supportive of all this. They're journalists in Beirut, these legacy media journalists. They're all a part of this collaboration. They're all genocidal. They're like the Nazi propaganda machine. They're no different. They're all the same. But in any case, so Iran said that we're going to hit and hit hard. My expectation was that this would lead to war, and Iran was fully prepared for war. And the Iranian.
Yeah, It seems that we've lost Professor Marandi, but he's going to be back. Yeah, you're back, Professor.
Okay. Where did I get cut off?
Yeah, you said about Iran. Iran was going to attack. Iran was prepared for the war,
Right.
for a full-scale war.
Yeah. So my understanding was that early in the morning, the Iranians were going to strike in the early hours of the morning. I'm not quite sure about the exact timing, but it was supposed to happen very soon. Now, as I said, my expectation and the expectation of many was that war would happen, but Iran was prepared for it. There are a number of issues. One is a moral issue, obviously, which is first and foremost. But also, it's obvious that if Iran allows the United States to violate a ceasefire, to violate an agreement at any level, that agreement is not going to work. So after the 39 days of fighting, when the US and the Israeli regime launched their blitzkrieg attack and their murderous war and slaughtered the kids in the school and all that, after 39 days when it ended and we had a ceasefire and there was a ceasefire agreement, and immediately Netanyahu back then began to carpet bomb Beirut, Iran discontinued its implementation. Iran was going to allow those extra ships from the countries that helped the United States in the Persian Gulf to leave through the Strait, and Iran stopped it. Why? Moral issues are, of course, paramount for us with the axis of resistance. This whole axis was made to support the people of Palestine against ethno-supremacism. But also, if you allow the Trump regime or any US regime or any Western regime to violate a part of the agreement, they will move on to the next part of the agreement. Because once you say, okay, well, that's okay, we'll exclude that, but implement the rest, that's not what they're going to do. They'll say, well, we got this, let's do the next one. So when it comes to these monsters, when it comes to this, the Epstein class, you have to be tough. You have to be steadfast and say, no, you cross this red line, we're done. And that was the mistake that Iran made during the nuclear deal, the JCPOA. We negotiated in good faith. We implemented our side of the bargain, but the deal was designed in a way in which the Americans, its implementation of the deal was basically left to their, they would decide if they would do so or not. We counted on their goodwill. That was extremely naive because the United States didn't show goodwill. So the Iranians implemented their side of the bargain, and some of what they did was irreversible, at least for the short or medium term. And then the United States under Obama refrained from doing so. So now the Iranians are saying, A, every element of the deal has to be implemented, and B, the other side has to implement first. Whenever we come to the conclusion that they are carrying out their obligations, then we will move to the next stage. That is why the Iranians, when it's in the current negotiations, they say the money has to be transferred to Iran. So why? It's not because Iran needs it now instead of 2 weeks from now, because the Iranians know that if the deal is implemented, Americans won't do it, and 2 weeks will become 2 months, and it will become and nothing will happen. Just like with the JCPOA. So with Lebanon, their moral issue is paramount, but also the Iranians know that if they let the Americans and the Israelis get away with these violations, then the whole deal will come crashing down on the heads of Iranians. Another thing that I have to point out is, and sorry for this very long talk, but there are a few things that I should point out. Another thing that people don't recognize is that throughout the Iranians have been saying there must be a ceasefire across the region. That includes Gaza. Gaza is not named, nor is the West Bank, nor is Yemen, nor is Iraq, because they're all a part of the region. Lebanon is named because of the genocidal attacks on Lebanon. The targeting of the Lebanese people right now is like how Gaza was being hit last year. but it includes Gaza. That has to be a part of the ceasefire. Now, Gaza is complicated because U.S. allies in the region helped Trump impose a very bad agreement on Gaza. You remember when Trump went to Egypt and all these regional leaders, Sisi and Erdogan and Aliyev and Abdullah, and Jordan and others from the Persian Gulf, and they all went there and they whitewashed his crimes, they praised him, and they basically gave a stamp of approval on the ceasefire in Gaza. Iran was not a part of that process. But Iran would never stand against any decision made by Hamas. So there is already a ceasefire in Gaza. And so Iran's room for maneuvering Gaza is not all that great. Right? So if Hezbollah, let's say, had agreed that, let's say, the Israeli regime was to take this area permanently or whatever, or for the time being, that would limit Iran's abilities. So, and of course, Hezbollah would never do that, but Hamas was under immense pressure. And these countries were helping the United States. Now, they can pretend otherwise, and I have friends who still argue with me from Turkey, and understandably, they want to believe that their government is helping the Palestinians, but no, their government is helping Israel. At a time when we have fuel shortages across the world, Aliyev in Azerbaijan, a Shia country, an ally of the Israeli regime, is transporting oil to help Netanyahu through Turkey. So Aliyev and Erdogan are facilitating Netanyahu's government and the genocide in Gaza and Lebanon, the West Bank, and all that. So anyway, so the Gaza is included. Gaza was never excluded, but because of that agreement, which had the support of these regional regimes, it is difficult for Iran to push too far because there is already an agreement that everyone agreed. They'll say if the Hamas agreed to it, everyone else agreed to it. Now you're trying to change. So Iran wants to make sure that that agreement is enforced, because since the ceasefire, almost 950 Palestinians have been murdered. And you're not seeing this in the media, the Western media. You only see it online from activists, because the Western media doesn't want us to know this, just like they don't want people to know that the Israelis are flattening towns and cities across Lebanon.
Yeah. You're here with us, Professor.
Yes.
Yeah. And, I think there is a sign there from yesterday for all the people in the acts of resistance, which was, yesterday Donald Trump said, the United States said to Hezbollah, if you want to avoid Israel attacking Dahia, then you stop attacking Israel in the southern part of Lebanon. It was unbelievable, this argument. And, it seems that they're occupying your territory. You have to stop attacking them, or they're going to attack, some other parts of your country. Then we see Iran coming in and changing the whole thing. And this is this going to be the attitude of that axis of resistance as time goes by? Because we know if you back down, as we've seen, you mentioned the case of Gaza. The case of Gaza is a clear example of what has happened so far. Because they destroyed everything. They're killing people in Gaza, in the West Bank, each and every day. And Iran doesn't want that for Lebanon. Is that the case? And how is that going to be manageable on the part of the axis of resistance?
Well, Iran doesn't want it for Gaza or for Lebanon equally. But again, the regional regimes, in my opinion, treacherously assisted Trump in imposing a ceasefire on Gaza, which is not a ceasefire. And right now we see that the Israeli regime is not only murdering people, but they're taking more territory, and they want to even go further. They're even now pushing, Netanyahu wants to push for 70% of Gaza. All of this is a violation, but you're not going to see it in the New York Times or the Guardian or the Washington Post or anywhere like that. So Iran's options in Gaza are more limited, just finding a way that to stop the slaughter of children, women and children, and the innocent. They're all innocent, but you get what I'm saying. And then in Lebanon, Iran's, the Iranians are saying that the Israeli regime must leave Lebanon. And we must go to a point where the Israeli regime is not occupying any part of Lebanon, and the Israeli regime cannot carry out operations inside Lebanon and start assassinating people again. That's not acceptable. With regards to reconstructing Lebanon, Iran have no doubt, Nima. Through reparations, the Iranian will take that money, and they will help rebuild every building in southern Lebanon, even though the Lebanese government doesn't want this. The Lebanese government is preventing Iran from sending aid to help people, the refugees. The Lebanese government is utterly sinister, utterly evil. They're helping the Americans in these regimes, these Arab dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, to corner the resistance supporters. They're a part of this, and they're blocking any aid from coming in from Iran or Iraq. They want to crush the people of the resistance. They're the enemies of Lebanese sovereignty, and they are also trying to push for a ceasefire where the Israelis are still in Lebanon. So, but Hezbollah will not accept. Lebanon sovereignty has to be restored. The Israeli regime must leave. And the Iranians, through the reparations that they get, they will rebuild both Iran and all of those areas destroyed in Lebanon. Every single building, every single home will be rebuilt.
What's funny, yesterday, the government in Lebanon said that we have done a lot of talks with the Americans to bring some sort of, it's just amazing. What?
They're puppets. The prime minister and the president, they're just puppets.
Yeah. When it comes to the Professor Marandi, to the negotiations between Iran and the United States, what can we learn about that? And how, because Donald Trump yesterday tweeted that the talks are going well between Iran and the United States. The other point that he mentioned yesterday, he said he called Benjamin Netanyahu and Hezbollah. I don't know who was talking with him on the part of Hezbollah. He was talking with Iran and he said Hezbollah.
Of course, he wasn't speaking with anyone in Hezbollah. But I mean, that's Trump. Well, no one should take anything that he says seriously. The Iranians stopped the negotiations. Why? Because that would be added pressure. Again, going back to what I said earlier, Iran does not want the global economy to crash. Whoever thinks that is wrong, even if they support it, because a lot of people want Iran to crash the global economy, and they're willing to make the personal sacrifices so that the resistance would be able to defeat it. I understand that, but it's not the right path, because